Okay, so we are now live, Steve. Welcome, Steve Tendon, author of Tame Your Workflow. We're going to be talking about Tame Your Workflow today.
Yes,
Steve,
thank you. Thank you, John.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to your Agility Chefs live show. I've seen some of your earlier episodes, the one with Daniel and the one with John Seddon, and I really like how you're setting these things up with all the interaction with the audience, the questions, and the people coming in. So I'm really looking forward to have fun here with you and everyone else who's connected.
Thank you so much, Steve. We have a comment from John Woolamarty. Hi, John. How you doing? So if people want to come on camera as well, they can do so. I'm just going to show you a couple of messages around that. So we have a URL for actually joining that, but I just want to make you aware of an offer that we have today. So Steve's book is normally $120, but I believe there's an offer for 48 hours on the Tameflow website. So I'm going to post that link on the comments, but it's already on the YouTube description underneath, and it will also be on the Facebook videos as well, Periscope as well later on. So it's a really, really good book, and in fact, one of the reasons why Steve is here is because the people I intend to invite to this live stream tends to be people who what I say that they break my brain. So Steve broke my brain, just like John said, and a few other people. It's like things that I thought were true that weren't so true when I had it kind of articulated well to me. So thank you so much. Delighted that you came here today. Steve, I'd like you to maybe just give everyone a background on your bio, if that's okay. Just bring up your bio, if you could just talk us through that, if you don't mind.
Okay, so my screen is shared, I guess.
Yes.
My name is Steve Tendon. I am the founder and managing director of Tameflow Consulting Limited, and the Mouthpiece series. I create pragmatic, human-centered, inclusive, sustainable, systemic breakthrough performance innovation in knowledge-intensive digital businesses. So there is a lot there, but since you are connected to this channel that is about agility, I thought we would start with that. So what is the connection of Tameflow with the rest of Agile and agility? I don't know if you're seeing my screen here. By the way, I'm using Miro, so this will be an exercise in extreme dexterity for me, managing the board, the Miro board, and at the same time be speaking in a microphone. So I want to start with Scrum. Scrum, as you probably know, was first announced officially in 1995 in an UPSLA conference with a paper by Ken Schwaber that was entitled Scrum, all capitals, yes, like that, all capitals, development process. So it was considered like a process at that time and not as a framework. Now, what is interesting is that the origins of Scrum also relate to other things that happened in the past, and one in particular is this famous paper for anyone who is interested in Scrum, written by Takeuchi and Nonaka in 1986. The new product development game. It was a groundbreaking paper because it was introducing the very concept of Scrum. Actually, I would be more precise there and say that Nonaka and Takeuchi were interested in like intensive teamwork, and they compare this to rugby. Now, John, I mean, you are in the UK, or maybe I don't know if that's politically correct because you're in Ireland, right? Or you're Irish.
I'm actually in London today. I live in London now. Yeah.
Okay, but you certainly know more than me about rugby, because I know next to nothing. I mean, I'm from Sweden originally, so ask me about ice hockey, but not about rugby. But is it correct that Scrum is only a phase of the game?
Yeah, it is. Essentially, it's basically one of the set pieces, if you like, that essentially what would happen is you'd have a kind of almost like a reset of the game where the ball is rolled in, and you've got two teams kind of against each other, and whoever kind of wins the scrum usually gets the ball away and can kind of move forward. And the whole I guess the whole metaphor of rugby and scrum in particular is about the whole team getting together where they're all different jobs, but we work together to get the ball across the game line.
Yeah, that's the point I think that is most interesting in the rugby metaphor, when someone is like carrying the ball and passing it to a teammate, and the effort is to reach do you call it the goal line at the other end?
The gain line, yeah.
Yeah. So it is that passing of the ball from one member to the other that creates like the team collaboration. So Scrum as such is maybe not entirely representative of that metaphor. So I would say there is a distinction between Takeushi's idea of thinking in terms of Scrum and passing the ball, and Scrum as that moment when you get together. Now there are some elements in Scrum which might be interesting to see where they come from, and I refer in particular to the Standup meeting, or rather the connection Standup and Sprint, the product owner and the Scrum Master. Jeff Sutherland will tell you that these ideas actually originated from another paper published in 1994 by Jim Kaplan. It was called the Borland Software Craftsmanship. Now, Jim Kaplan, you might know him because he's a prominent figure in the Scrum world nowadays. But at the time, he was working with AT&T, and we might look later into the details of what he was doing. But the most important role he had there was to study other organizations and figure out how they could produce software more productively. AT&T, as you know, was a telecom company, and making software was one of their major concerns. So figuring out better ways of producing software was definitely something of interest. Copley went out and studied many companies, but there was one that was standing out from all others, and that was Borland International. He eventually started documenting what he found there, and this paper actually inspired Jeff Sutherland to introduce the stand-up, the sprint, the product owner, and the Scrum Master. Now, this is not very evident in the information we have today, but there is like a website. I don't know if you see the link there. The Origins of the Daily Stand-Up by Jeff Sutherland. It's on Scrum Inc. You can check it up, and you will see these references to Borland. Now, why do I tell you this story? Well, because there was one product within this particular study, which was the Borland Quattro Pro for Windows team, which served as the example for Jim Kaplan to identify the elements of high productive teams. The Quattro Pro for Windows team was a complete outlier, no matter in what way you are trying to measure their performance. So why do I tell you all this? Well, because in the period of 1987 to 1992, I was the technical director of Borland, Italy, and I was also part of the internationalization team in Scots Valley. So I was completely in the development cycles of all of Borland products. And at that time, it was not only Quattro Pro, which was a spreadsheet, but there were things like, of course, the famous compilers like Turbo Pascal, Turbo C++. There were databases like Paradox. There were word processors like Sprint and many others. So there is like this sort of common heritage between what I do and what is the inspiration of many of the elements of Scrum. So we have a common pedigree, if you wish, with the difference, and I like to point this out, that Jeff Sutherland had to learn about the things happening in Borland indirectly through the papers of Jim Kaplan, while I was there on the ground, and this also might explain why I have developed a lot of criticism against Scrum, because I see that many of the things that happened there became mightily distorted. One thing which we will get back into later is this little diagram, which you probably have seen in many other places, like in design thinking. But one of the first papers documenting this was actually the new product development game, where the idea that in knowledge work you have moments where you're just asking questions, you don't know what is going on, and there are many opinions, and you have like this differentiation. That's the term that Takeuchi used. And then you start bringing things together and you have integration. In design thinking, you might be talking about divergence and convergence. I will ask you, John, to remind me later about this diagram, because it is absolutely fundamental. But one point that brings together the origin of Scrum with Tameflow is what happened with Jim Kaplan's work. Why? Because Jim Kaplan conducted his study in a way that was quite extraordinary. The approach was not that of a software process methodologist, but rather that of an anthropologist, of a sociologist. And in fact, he studied these companies in terms of social networks, how people communicated and interacted, and what kind of communication interaction did produce good, high-performing teams. And not only did it have this approach, but then he started documenting what he found in terms of patterns. And in software, patterns play an important role, especially if you are in object-oriented programming. And Kaplan, by the way, was an exceptional C++ engineer and wrote very important books and papers on C++ and patterns. So the approach was that of looking at companies from a social anthropological perspective and document the findings there in terms of patterns. And in particular, this struck me once I left Borland. Because when I left Borland and started working with other companies, I was so disappointed that all these other places were so slow. They were dragging. They were just not moving at all compared to what I was used to in Borland. And that's where I started to look at the situation where I was operating at the companies I was working with, and started to try to understand, what are the patterns that are present here or absent here, and vice versa, were absent or present in Borland. And I started developing this body of knowledge of mine, which was all represented in terms of patterns. At the end, I like taking up two of the patterns from Kaplan, which are the unity of purpose and the community of trust, I came to this conclusion that high-performing organizations, not necessarily teams, but organizations, because I was involved in many large projects, including mergers and acquisitions of companies. Well, high-performing organizations are characterized by two specific patterns: unity of purpose and community of trust. Later, I added a third pattern, which is inspired leadership. I stress this: it's inspired, it's not inspiring. So the leader has to be inspired. So these three patterns are the basis for high-performing organizations, and anything I have done that eventually resulted in Tameflow was on the basis of these three patterns. Now, John invited me to this webinar because of the book, and the book is all about Kanban and theory of constraints. So where does this come into the picture? Well, around 2002 or 3, maybe even 4, I discovered theory of constraints, and that was through David Anderson's book, Agile Management. I don't remember the exact title. Maybe John can find it and put it in the show notes later. But anyway, it was the very first book that connected software engineering to theory of constraints. That was an eye-opener for me. The connection became immediately clear that because in the theory of constraints you're focusing on a constraint, which colloquially is known as Herbie, and we will see shortly why that is so, where this name comes from. Well, because you're focusing on the weakest link of the entire organization, there is one point where the attention of everyone can come together, and therefore that is like a catalyst to build up the unity of purpose. Now, of course, the theory of constraints has many bits and pieces and components, so there are things that you will recognize under the abbreviations or acronyms as 5 focusing steps, the thinking processes, the evaporating cloud, and throughput accounting. Now, I was very happy to have found this thing of Herbie, and at that point, something else happened. But I know, John, you want to tell the story of Herbie first before we go forward? I'm not sure we hear you.
Thank you for checking me on that. Thank you so much. So yeah, what I'd like to do now is I'd like to share some of the work on theory of constraints, because that's the background really for today's chat, isn't it? Tameflow is essentially the combination of Kanban, theory of constraints, and throughput accounting. And throughput accounting, I've got the book here right next to me. I'll put the details in the notes afterwards. So we're going to talk about that today. And the 5 focusing steps are identifying the constraint. A lot of the time we don't even know what the constraint is, but it's really illustrated very well in a lovely story about Herbie the Boy Scout. And the best illustration that I've seen of this has actually been in the Tameflow book at the very start of the book. I'm just going to read you the story. So I'm going to put this on full screen so you can get to see all of this. So this is the story of Herbie. It's a story about a team of scouts who set out on an overnight hike, and they start their walk early in the morning, planning to hike through a forest to a remote place where they'll set up camp, sleep overnight, and then walk back the next morning. The trail in front of the team can be imagined as a long series of steps. You can see the visualization there. And the walk started briskly. The terrain was unchallenging, and the trail was well marked, and it was easy to follow. So far, so good. But all scouts were carrying their own rucksacks. The terrain becomes a bit more difficult, and there's undergrowth with either side forcing the hikers into a kind of a single line. It's getting a bit more tricky. And then as the terrain becomes more and more difficult, the line stretches longer and longer. And the troop leader is concerned about keeping the team together to ensure that nobody gets lost in the forest. And one of the scouts is like me, he's a little bit overweight. That's a bit of an understatement, okay? So it's getting a bit tricky. And in the book, what I remember was most people can walk about 4 miles per hour, but they were walking on average 1 mile per hour because it was like an accordion. The team was completely stretching out. So when they'd have a break, they'd have to wait for the slowest boy to come in, which was usually Herbie. So there's Herbie with his big belly like me, and he's also got a backpack which is overloaded. And at first, Herbie he can keep the pace, but he's a bit slower than the others. And in effect, he's holding up those behind him, who eventually overtake his position. So they're starting to pass him out. See, the troop leader is encouraging the team to close ranks and to keep together. So one after another, all those behind the slow scouts overtake him. And eventually he drops out to the end of the line, which is kind of no good for a bunch of Boy Scouts because you're not there until the last Boy Scout has actually arrived. So he's falling behind. He's still slower than everybody else. Eventually a gap develops and he walks alone and far behind all of the others. It reminds me of a bike race that was in years ago. When the ambulance passes you, you know you're the last guy in the race. People who do bike racing will know what I mean by that. So there he is. He's falling behind. Let's go to Herbie. The troop leader calls him and says, Herbie. Now the leader is even more concerned that the boys will get lost in the woods because it's probably going to get dark. And he's worried about how slow they're going. Not only is Herbie going to be left behind, but the faster ones are pulling away in front. So it's really stretching out like an accordion. The troop leader shouts, come on, Herbie, speed up. So trying to exploit the constraint, if you like. Herbie is the constraint in this case. To encourage the scout to walk faster, but he's already walking at the maximum of his speed. Eventually, the leader understands that Herbie's speed is determining the troop's ability as a whole to move faster, but Herbie can only walk at his own pace, slower than anybody else, and Herbie is determining the troop's throughput, as in how much value we're getting in terms of how much terrain they can actually cover per unit of time. So the troop leader realizes that whoever is moving the slowest in the troop is actually determining the overall throughput. We're going as slow as Herbie. So that role can actually flow from one scout to another. It depends on who it is. But Herbie was definitely the slowest that day. His speed is ultimately determining the speed of the entire troop. So the troop leader then puts Herbie in front of the line and commands everybody stay behind Herbie. And also gives instructions that nobody should pass anyone, but rather keep the position. So guess what happened, right? Everybody's going as slow as Herbie now. So are we still going to get there before dark? So in that way, the team can stay together, nobody's out of breath. Any gap that develops can easily be recovered. And since everybody can walk faster than Herbie, who's at the front, now at least nobody will get lost in the woods. We don't leave any man behind. And you'll hear that expression a few times on this live stream. However, time is running out and they run the risk of not reaching camp before dark, and the troop must walk faster. So Herbie is not only overweight, but his backpack is overloaded. And his backpack contains a 6-pack of soda, a few cans of spaghetti, a few candy bars, a jar of pickles, and 2 cans of tuna fish. And in addition, for the sake of being prepared as a good Boy Scout, he also has a raincoat, rubber boots, a bag of tent stakes, a large iron skillet, and a collapsible steel shovel. So the troop leader realizes that if some of the load could be taken off Herbie, then Herbie would be able to walk faster. So he commands everybody let's take a piece of Herbie's gear. So you can see that Herbie's gear bag is actually left behind. I'm surprised he didn't even carry that in his back. But the weight has been distributed across the rest of them. So with this new arrangement, the team can now walk at double the speed, and they're still able to keep together with Herbie. They arrive at their night camp late in the afternoon, just before dusk. The troop leader reflects on the fact that Herbie was key in governing the performance of the entire team. So I've been using this model since about 2015. I'm a bit of a slow learner. I was listening to the goal one day out the back garden, and I believe Ali Goldratt, who actually came up with the goal. If I just show you that now, if I just switch my window here. So Ellie Goldratt, he died a few years ago, and he actually, there's a video link that I have in the notes of this video, which is where he commented on the 2008 financial crisis. But he wrote a wonderful book, and he went to 60 publishers apparently, and nobody would publish the book. So he turned it into a kind of a formula called the Hero's Dilemma, which is now used by the Harry Potter series, I believe. And the Phoenix Project, also the Unicorn Project, were all kind of based on that format. So lovely little metaphor. So when I was in a company a few years ago, I said, "Where's our Herbie?" They said, what are you talking about? So I had a thing called a Herbie map. I was like trying to draw where are the constraints in our setup. And one of the things, Steve, that confuses me about this is that essentially they talked about the bottleneck in the book, but in Tameflow you talk about the constraint. And I'm a bit confused about it. You even look at the website. The website's talking about the constraint, but the book talked about the bottleneck. So, like, what's the difference between a bottleneck and a constraint?
So yes, the confusion is there, and even many who are active practitioners of theory of constraints will also use these two terms interchangeably. Now, Goldratt's initial novel, The Goal, and his initial focus was in the world of manufacturing, and their bottlenecks are very evident. It's a physical thing. You can literally see piles of work standing in front of the bottleneck. But that distinction came about between the bottleneck and the constraint later when Goldratt's attention started to take into account even other elements which are not necessarily physical. So a constraint can also be immaterial because it can be, for instance, a constraint of a policy. It can be a constraint of decision making. It can be a constraint of management attention. Or it can be an external constraint like a market constraint. And Goldratt defined a constraint as not a bottleneck, but as that element, whatever it might be, that mostly prevents you from reaching the company goal. Now, if you are in a simple situation like a manufacturing plant, or even an immaterial situation like software engineering, you will still have this confusion between bottlenecks and constraints. So a bottleneck is simply any resource that has less capability than the demand that is put onto it. But the constraint is the bottleneck of the many that can exist, according to that definition, is the bottleneck that has the least capacity of all. And it is important to have this distinction, and in particular if you are in the Kanban world, because you will be misled in believing that you have found the constraint, while in reality you have found a bottleneck that is still a bottleneck but has more capacity than the constraint. And typically if the bottleneck happens like upstream of the constraint, it is masking the constraint, and you will not see that that is the constraint. So another insight of Goldratt is that whatever you do to improve the performance that does not affect the constraint is just a total waste of time, of effort, of money. And therefore, if you mistakenly take some bit of your reality as the constraint, but in reality it's only one of the many bottlenecks, all the effort you expend on fixing that bottleneck is a total waste. And the Kanban method will typically bring you to do this quite a lot.
Thank you, Steve. I got a couple of comments from Srikant. Srikant is a member of the LESS community. He put quite a few comments on, and I want to bring up a couple of them, if that's okay. So one of the first ones, when you were talking about your time back in Borland and what you saw, like the early days of Scrum, if you like, or even before Scrum. So Strickland's, I think it's a question and a comment. Is a creative definition, Steve, to fit your story? Scrum could cover all the work if structured the way it is meant to be. So I think Strickland is kind of casting an opinion there. Do you have any comments on what Strickland is saying there, Steve?
I'm not quite sure I understand what the point is. Creative definition of what? Which story? Scrum could cover all the work if structured the way it is meant to be. No, Scrum does not cover all the work, and this is one of the evolution of even my thinking. When you go from the team level to the systems level. For instance, Scrum says absolutely nothing about how you account for money, accounting, and that is a central piece of all the theory of constraints thinking. The goal in Goldratt's term is to make money today and in the future. And notice this is very, very subtle, because with that those three additional words, in the future, you bring about a lot of things that are important in terms of sustainability. So it is not just a rush for the cash as you have in today's stock market driven finance, where you want to hit the best numbers for the next quarter, but you want to be around in the future. So anything that pertains to sustainability is clearly very, very important. And that is also including the well-being of employees and any people involved in your reality. That also includes suppliers, and of course there is a focus on the customers. So Scrum is not at all a complete solution, and I strongly contest that. And it's one of the folklore stories that you hear about Scrum. It's not like the silver bullet.
Thank you, Steve. I'm good. Strickland, there's another comment as well. We're still working with the manufacturing metaphor for knowledge work. So I think the hint here is that, kind of like lean, for example, coming from manufacturing, is theory of constraints designed for manufacturing? Are we kind of corrupting and bringing into knowledge work? I think that's the undertone behind that comment. I'm just guessing there. What's your reaction to that, Steve?
Absolutely correct. Theory of constraints is about manufacturing, but we are talking about Tameflow, which is another thing. It's the reinterpretation of the ideas that Goldratt brought about, trying to get them in the knowledge work context. Now, in the history of like my thinking, we had. Can we go back to that full screen, because I want to continue with that story.
Yeah.
David Anderson introduced the idea of theory of constraints in software development, but he was not able to make it work. Why? Because there is this clear connection to manufacturing, and another manufacturing metaphor, Kanban, came about thanks to David Anderson, and this was, I think, 2006-07. Why was Kanban introduced? For a simple reason that with the theory of constraints, step number one is find the constraint, find Herbie. It was impossible to do. This is a common theme if you're looking at Kanban. So it's impossible to find the constraints in knowledge work. Why? Because it jumps about so quickly. You get the movie constraint syndrome. You never know where it is. So Kanban was introduced to go around the impossibility of finding the constraint, and because you couldn't find the constraint, you couldn't apply all the thinking of theory of constraints, and you use instead the column width limits, which for me are a broken metaphor. It's one of the worst things you can do. But column width limits and Scrum use the same idea, that is to limit work in process, invisible immaterial work. We will see that there are other ways to limit the work in process, which are consistent with theory of constraints. So this set me off, and I want to highlight this in the reply to the audience, that I tried from 2011 onwards to resolve this mismatch, that you cannot find the constraint in knowledge work. All my work, I did a master's in software project management at that time, was focusing on resolving that issue, and eventually I did, and figured out how to get Herbie back into a knowledge work setting. So maybe we should reason about this. What is knowledge work, right? You know that maybe I should switch screens, so maybe I can draw something.
This will be fun. While you're doing that, I'm going to just bring up a few comments as well. So you can. I'll take it off screen for now while you're just preparing your next drawing. So I got a few comments coming in, and so Srikant has come back again. Actually, so just going to read a few of them. So we should look at Scrum as a meta process, a container for other practices. Is a response from Srikant, but I've got some other comments going on as well. Thank you for that, Srikant. Another one from Srikant is another way to look at constraints is the complexity angle. Absolutely, we're going to talk about Kanban later on, Srikant, so just hold your powder until we get to that. A couple of other comments as well. From Dabber Basic, Scrum is just a framework. It depends on the domain, as in what's known as the content. And lady from New York here, you said earlier, we're using Tameflow to clean up failed Scrum and safe implementations, stalled mindset shifts. Love it. Very nice. Thank you very much for that. And then Dabber's back again saying this, that is really cool. Sounds good. So yeah, there's a few of those, and just a few other things as well, just before we kind of dig into this as well, while you're preparing your drawing there, Steve.
Well, I'm ready because I'll try to do this in real time as well.
Okay, cool. I'll put on that. Yeah. So
I mentioned before when I introduced the story of Scrum and Tameflow, that paper of Takeuchi and Naka, which has this fundamental concept of differentiation and integration. So we have two phases: one where we ask questions, so questions marks, and another where we find solutions, so exclamation marks. And this mode of operating is typical of knowledge work. We can imagine that we have these phases, and at the end we have maybe created something. Let's draw that little box. Then we have another one of these iterations, and we add something else to what we've done, and this thing goes on. And what we are doing, these cycles are iterations. We are iterating all the time, and we are building things up as we go. So these three delivery points are our increments. So we have incremental iterative approaches. But what's even more significant is that like inside in the in these differentiation integration phases, we have interactions between individuals. This is absolutely fundamental. These three elements, iteration, increments, and interactions, so what we could call the three I's, are clearly the domain of knowledge work. So where does this fit in the manufacturing metaphor or not? And everyone gets really keen on. Sorry, I'm moving around the screen. Hold on a second. Let's see if we can.
It's no problem. We got a few more comments coming in.
Synchronize. Okay, that's better. Where does this fit into the manufacturing metaphor? Because everyone is so incredibly keen to immediately point out that, oh, this is from the manufacturing world, so it cannot work. So what is the distinction between manufacturing and knowledge work? I would say at the end of the day, there is no greater distinction except for the degree of uncertainties and unknowns. So in the manufacturing world, you will have like let's call it the schedule, the production schedule, now a list of things to do, and you will have a bill of materials, so a tree of components and subcomponents. That's manufacturing. Then you have the world of project management, where you will have like your work breakdown structure and the wonderful Gantt charts, right? So I'm just sketching here, but imagine that this is a Gantt chart. And John, if you're able to read my handwriting, I'll give you extra points, because when I was a kid and went at school, my teacher told my parents, your son is a disaster. His handwriting changes more than the weather. And we were based in Gothenburg, and Gothenburg has more rain than Dublin. So my handwriting is a piece of art. And when I'm able to read that, I'm very happy. But you see that going from let's say the manufacturing world to the project management world, what has happened is an increased degree of uncertainty. Why? Because the Gantt chart can have much more variation than a bill of materials. Now let's take this a step further and go back to the knowledge work. What you're seeing here is that we are delivering things, and iteration by iteration. We won't call them sprint if you have to. That's what you're doing in Scrum. You are building these things up, but and this is absolutely fundamental. What you're doing in the differentiation integration phase, you cannot know up front. You cannot not know it upstream before, so to say. So you don't have the deterministic elements of manufacturing with a bill of material, and you don't have the deterministic with certain amount of variability elements of a Gantt chart. You just don't know. That's why you stop and go and iterate and repeat. Now, one important element in this, which also highlights a weakness of Scrum, is that I just said you cannot know when you have sufficient knowledge about what is going on. And if we sketch the sprint as we with this, let's see if I can be careful in the drawing. We have a short daily stand-up, and then several hours of work, a short daily stand-up, and several hours of work. So we have like this shape which presumes that a lot of the interaction can be compressed in those 15 minutes. And this compression is really not working well for knowledge work, I tell you. Likewise, you have like the sprint, which is like 2 weeks. So any idea that you can time box this work is suboptimal. And this is one of the misinterpretations that Jeff Sutherland did of Borland, because what was happening there was that on a daily basis you had meetings, but those meetings could last for hours. They were not time boxed at all. They could even go on the next day if the participants were not happy. And when were they happy? When, to use the idea of Brooks, when they reached conceptual integrity. So these meetings were ongoing and they were highly intensive and engaging until the people developed the right idea. Yes, this is what we want to do. And then that idea was implemented very, very quickly, maybe in a matter of hours. So the shape could vary, but it always had like a prevalent moment of discovery and a shorter moment of implementation. Now these meetings, these cycles could also vary. Some could be very, very long. So you had some that were maybe a few days, some that were hours, some that were weeks. Nothing was time boxed. What mattered was reaching conceptual integrity. And unless that conceptual integrity was there, you would not delve into the development work. And on Tameflow, I am working on these ideas. Now, John, I don't know if I'm going off topic, but you stop me if you feel that this is not adequate or appropriate, because otherwise I will continue with the next point.
Yeah, please continue. Yeah, thank you.
All right. So there is one element that comes from ToC, which is extremely interesting for this kind of work, and that is critical chain project management. Why is that interesting? Because in critical chain project management, there are like two aspects. One is the planning, which is similar to conventional project management. So yes, not agile at all. So we can discard that thing. We are not interested. But the second part is about the execution management of the work that is being done. This is extremely interesting because from this we get what I call work execution work signals. The work is talking to you. In Scrum, you have the sprint. Every 2 weeks, you reflect, you demo, you do the retrospective, and you talk about what went wrong. In Tameflow, we talk about what goes wrong at any moment, and we know the moment because we get these work execution signals. So it's very reactive. We react on the spot, so much more agile than Scrum, and even more than Kanban. But this, of course, brings the question: how do we produce these work execution signals? And here we have to start to see how to connect the dots, because in CCPM, the work execution signals are determined on a timeline. So there is a timeline, and we have like an expectation, a probability distribution that might look like that. And if you are in Kanban and using like probabilistic forecasting, you're very familiar with this concept, that a project, an amount of work, an iteration has an expected probability distribution for being delivered. And in that probability distribution, we try to find a section where we can like highlight a buffer. We conventionally color it green, yellow, and red. The signals happen when our projections of delivery like eat into this buffer. So when it goes from green to yellow, we have a signal. When it goes from yellow to red, we have another signals. Now, what is the point? What is the dot that we need to connect? That in order to establish where this buffer is positioned on the timeline, if it's more to the left or more to the right, and also how big this buffer is, we need one fundamental piece of knowledge, and that is, where is Herbie? Where is Herbie? Now, the theory of constraints resolves this through planning and defining the so-called critical chain, and the critical chain will give you this timeline, and there are a few like heuristic rules to determine where the buffer is. But we said planning is not working. It's not agile. So we can't do that. In Tameflow, we do something completely different, but the end result is that we do get a timeline and we do get a buffer, so we can apply the work signals, and therefore we become much more agile than anything else that you know about. Now, I better stop here because otherwise I'd have to explain the whole of Tameflow. I know I left open this fundamental question of how do you find Herbie in knowledge work? Well, that is the whole point of Tameflow. That's the one question I've been working on for like the last 9-10 years, and I claim that I have resolved that part.
Thank you very much, Steve. I've got a few comments coming in. I just want to get back to them. So Strickland is back again saying it's hard communicating YouTube live, missing Zoom and its direct interaction. So the reason that we're using live stream is more scalable and it's more interactive. And actually, there's a URL at the that's been sent out to the comments on all the channels. There's a URL where you can actually join us. So it's bit.ly/Steve Tendon, and you can join us on camera. You can question us on camera. So that's for anybody who wants to join. Please use that. The link is in your live stream. So thank you for that, Strickland. Appreciate that. Kay came back to us. I've seen a lot of money wasted solving the wrong problem. Thank you, Kay. Chuck came back saying, so if you had only one reason to use Kanban, what would you say? He said he joined late. Is Tameflow part of Kanban? So can you give Chuck maybe a 1-minute summary of what Tameflow actually is?
So that's the hardest question you could ask me, John, because Tameflow gets its name because it focuses on 4 flows. One flow is operational flow, and Kanban and Scrum are clearly handling the operational flow. Another flow is financial flow, so what the accountants, what the CFOs are interested in. Another one is informational flow, so making sure that any people that have to make decisions get the right information at the right time. And the fourth flow is psychological flow. So we're talking about mental flow states like those defined by the American Hungarian psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. So when you are in that state of mind where everything is just easy and flows. Now, because we have 4 flows, I could give you a nutshell explanation, but I have to know which flow is the interesting one for you. So if you are like the chief financial officer, the accountant, I could tell you, well, Tameflow will make you look at numbers differently, and you will understand how to help your company to make more money, right? And if you are like an HR manager, I would say, Tameflow is dealing a lot with the psychology of people. So at the end of the day, people will be happier at work and will be more engaged. And the level of trust within the organization will increase enormously. If you are like a CTO or engineering department head, I would just say, Tameflow will take anything you're doing with Scrum and Kanban and just put it on steroids. So it will deliver much, much more than what you're used to. So it really depends on what is your interest. Tameflow is a systems thinking approach, so it takes a very broad perspective. And if your daily reality is a part of that perspective, well, then I need to know what is that reality. Then I can give you like the impact of Tameflow thinking on your reality.
Thank you very much. Question from Frederick as well. What's the usage limit of Tameflow? I'm guessing what's meant there is what type of work could you use it for? I'm guessing, but I don't know if it's a scaling question as well, Frederick. Do you want to make an attempt to answer that one, Steve?
So it's a very, very good question, but Tameflow is different from anything that you know. So it's not based like on practices. It's not based on events and ceremonies. It's not based on values. It's not based on frameworks. Tameflow is primarily a way of thinking. So it's a collection of mental models. It is based on the scientific approach, and therefore, if I have to find a limit of where and when Tameflow cannot be used, well, that is in organizations that are, how can we say, led by very authoritative figures, where the opinion of few people have the prevalence in the decision-making processes. But if you are in a situation where you want to make factual decisions based on metrics and numbers and uncontestable numbers, then Tameflow will be entirely applicable.
Thank you. Got another question from John Preload as well, John Jorgensen from the US. So what are the prerequisites, if any, to responsibly experiment with Tameflow in large organizations? You kind of gave one prerequisite. Will there be any others?
Well, it's the point is that Tameflow is, at the end of the day, when you see the whole picture, it's really, really easy. The prerequisite is simply to answer that fundamental question that Goldratt posed. Do you want to make money today and in the future? Ask that to the CEO and he will say yes. And when you see that goal can be expressed in terms of throughput, so financial throughput, operational throughput, you are developing a numeric language, which is the numbers language of management, that you can use throughout the entire organization. So the prerequisite is how can we say, to be open-minded and be prepared to discover like new lenses through which you can look at reality. And typically the focusing element will be throughput. And if you want to work with throughput, it's inevitable. You must know your Herbie. You're off again, John. You're muted.
Thank you. And we're going to come back to John's questions as well later on when the time is right. It needs to flow, John. Forgive the pun. So I want to kind of dig in a little bit into Tameflow, and direction where I'd like to go here is, what would be examples of constraint for knowledge work, for example, and then kind of getting into the particular boards that you have in Tameflow, because a lot of people will be thinking, well, I have the Kanban method, aren't I fine? Why do I need this? So with that kind of a mental model, we're kind of talking to that audience in terms of what's in it for them, kind of thing. But to just get us started on this, do you have some real life examples of a constraint in knowledge work?
Well, there are many examples. Maybe let's start with the second question there now. Can there be more than one constraint? Because Tameflow, as a systems thinking approach, has as a first exercise the definition of what is the system. Now you can put parentheses around many things.
Yeah.
And if you have a a small view like one Kanban board, then of course therein there is a constraint. If you have a broader view where you have maybe 10, 20, 100 teams, so 100 Kanban boards, and they are all working like on the same goal, well, then there is another constraint. It could be another team's Kanban board. It doesn't mean that in your team, in the little one, the constraint is gone. It's there for you, but in the bigger perspective, it might not be the constraint. So it's in an organization, you will have people who look, who have like a span of control, as I call it, that varies, and people in management positions have broader spans of control, and therefore at the same time, different people will see different constraints. It does not mean that the overarching constraint is that there is a multiplicity in the overarching view. Then there is only one constraint, but then you must have the big view. And if your focus is on a little team, you might not appreciate what the problem is in the big scale. So yes, there are always multiple constraints, but within one systemic perspective, there can only be one constraint.
Thank you very much. And I heard one of your spamcasts. You do quite a lot of podcasting, and I was really tuned into a particular comment that said, when the constraint is elevated, in other words, when you basically made Herbie perform better, you went on a diet or whatever he did, right? Instability arises, and if there is a new constraint, because basically the constraint will move, right? And so you mentioned that when instability arises, that Little's law is no longer supported. So there's a paper called Little's Law, for those of you who aren't aware of that. The Kaplan guys will know this well. But can you elaborate for the people who do understand Little's Law? Like I'm a 2-year-old, why does instability arise when the constraint is elevated?
Okay, so I'll go to the board again.
Yeah.
And maybe just start with a little. Yeah. Is my screen still on?
Yeah.
Okay. So in Kanban, we are very fond of using this kind of diagram where we have time versus amount of work, and we will always make like the distinction between a line of incoming work and a line of outgoing work, and inside here we can like visualize the amount of work that is in process. And we can also visualize the average time that work takes to go from start to finish. The idea of applying Little's law or exploiting rather than applying Little's law is that these two lines must be as parallel as possible. If they are not parallel, if they are, say, like that, which is typical of most companies, you have the rate of incoming work being much greater than the work going out of the system. This configuration is very difficult to manage because your timelines become longer and longer and longer, so it becomes more and more difficult to predict things. And how do you circumvent this? How do you go from this situation to this one? Well, you will try in as much as possible to limit work in process, which means that the line of incoming work is like artificially being made parallel to the speed of production, so to say, to the speed of delivery of the system. And this is the whole point of limit your work in process. Kanban does that with column width limits. Tameflow and ToC do it in another way. We might get back to that. But what happens when you elevate a constraint? Well, when you elevate a constraint, say you are, and I'll draw this in a thicker line, say you are progressing along this path here, and all of a sudden you elevate the constraints. So the constraint, your Herbie goes on a diet, and all of a sudden, because breakthrough constraints are almost immediate, the capacity there is increased. This line will go like that. So unless you're prepared to increase this acceleration so that you also accelerate the incoming work, this will create a lot of instability, and it could get to the point that things like break down and stop. So the typical example is maybe a team, a software engineering team that will greatly improve, and all of a sudden the constraint has moved somewhere else. Maybe it is the customer business analysis design discovery phase that cannot keep up. So your intervention, your change intervention, must move to that other team. So this is the sense when you have an elevation, your two parallel lines will no longer be parallel, and since they are no longer parallel, Little's law does not apply, and therefore you must work in a targeted way to return to conditions of applicability of Little's law. Why is Little's law so important? Because unless you keep those conditions, you cannot use probabilistic forecasting, which is one of the key points of Tameflow and some of the Kanban proponents use the same. Like Dan Vacanti is obviously one who comes to mind when we talk about probabilistic forecasting. I don't know, was that clear enough?
Yeah, it's very helpful, and I think what people will be really curious about, Steve, is just kind of where the rubber hits the road is, do the Kanban boards look different? I know there's a lot more to the theory of constraints and throughput accounting as well, but just some people will be very interested, because I heard that, for example, there's a flow efficiency board, for example, there's a Tameflow board, there's a board in between. Can you kind of give us an idea of what those boards are and why they're relevant, just at a very high level?
Well, John, I know you wanted to tell more about Herbie and the drum buffer rope, because that is like a premise of what we need to know to discover these boards.
Okay, so basically, earlier on when we talked about the Herbie story, they put Herbie to the front, they took his gear out of his backpack, and essentially that spread the load across the other Boy Scouts, and so they effectively elevated the constraint. They basically spread the work around. Okay, so that was good. But then there's this concept called drum buffer rope, which confused me when I was reading the goal, because I couldn't see anywhere in the Herbie story. I was kind of expecting it to be there. So I saw these images of a drummer, drummers. I think the drummer was up the front or something, and then Herbie was in the middle, and there was a rope back to Herbie. Can you talk to us a little bit about that, Steve? Did I pick that up wrong, or maybe you can explain it a bit better? How does drum buffer rope, how is that relevant for the Herbie story?
So in the Herbie story, we had Herbie that was put in front. I'm drawing again. Okay. That was put in front of the team, and all others were like walking behind, and that ensures that no one is walking faster than Herbie. Why is this important? Well, if we just imagine that diagram that we just saw, the amount of steps walked and delivered will be represented by this line, and the slope is like the speed of Herbie. If someone is walking faster than Herbie, well, the spread between him and Herbie will just increase and increase. So it's a situation of of instability. We don't have little slow, so to say. And now, when Herbie is put in front of everyone, then everyone is, let's draw that again, then everyone else is like forced to walk behind Herbie. They cannot overtake him. So we are keeping the lines parallel. Herbie was somewhere in the middle and was put in front. Now that's easy to do with a line of Boy Scouts, but if you are in a situation like a manufacturing plant or a software engineering shop, there are certain actions that just must happen before others. For one, the code needs to be coded before it is deployed, so you cannot put deployment in front of code. And therefore, the idea here is, what can we do if we are in a situation where our Herbie is there in the middle of the line? Well, the idea here is, first of all, let's make sure that there are a certain number of steps, 3 steps in front of Herbie. This is the buffer. Why is that important? Well, because if the guy in front needs to stop, maybe there is a minor problem, he needs to tie his shoes again, Herbie can keep on walking without stopping, and by the time he reaches that guy, the shoe will be tied and he will continue. On our line, it would look like this. We have someone who's walking and then stops and then continues walking, while Herbie is walking at that pace, and here Herbie is consuming the buffer, and then he can continue. He did not stop. So the buffer is there to ensure that Herbie does not stop. But we have also another element here, that how do we ensure that we are not walking away too fast, so that the person in front, this person, does not rush away and creates a gap? Well, that's where we have the drum element, which is like the signal. Anytime that Herbie takes a step, there is a drum beat and the person in front takes a step. So we keep the distance between, let's put this line over here, we keep the distance between Herbie and the front line the same all the time. We don't allow the front line to rush away. We keep the system balanced. And because we have this distance, which is like fixed, that is the rope. It's the rope that keeps the head at a certain distance, but no further. The effect of this is that the 2 lines will remain parallel, even if Herbie is in the middle of the process, and if anyone has a problem except Herbie, it will not affect the overall performance. Of course, if Herbie has a problem, then the whole team has to stop, and that's like the essence of the story. By the way, John, one thing which we should mention, which is like important difference, or not difference, it's important addition to the story of Herbie, is the 5 focusing steps. You just hinted at them before, and we have them there. That's typical of ToC. But from the Tameflow perspective, I say the story of Herbie is very important, because we have this element, you mentioned it briefly before, that we leave no man behind. Yes. And that everyone helps Herbie, and that Herbie has to trust his peers to help him. So you see there that well, they all want to get to the base camp together. We are having in that story, in that narrative, we have the elements of the unity of purpose and community of trust. So when I teach about Tameflow, I insist until even the walls of the officers know about it. I insist on the story of Herbie because I will bring it up over and over again in so many different instances. So anyway, that was just another element I wanted to put in, but that was the explanation of drum buffer rope. Was it okay?
Yeah. So basically, that leads to another kind of because you have a drum buffer rope replenishment technique, I believe. So basically, what happens is instead of what would happen in a normal Kanban board, an item goes out, then an item comes in. If you've got good flow, to keep those lines in parallel, as you said. When you've got a constraint in the middle, what you do is you don't replenish when something goes out the end of the process. You replenish when something goes to the end of the process and an item has gone through the constraint. Is that right?
Well, it's the drum part. So it's anytime that let's say a work item on a Kanban board where you have identified the constraint. When a work item, let's maybe draw that here on since we have the screen. So if we have a Kanban board, like schematically like this, and we happen to know, and we haven't discussed that yet. How do you know that this column is the Herbie? What we want to happen is that anytime a work item leaves that column, that gives the replenishment signal. So that is the drum part. That is the drum part. So when we might be just observing when a card goes from Herbie to the next column, then we send the signal and we have the replenishment. So the next item in your backlog goes into the work stream.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you very much. And there were a couple of other boards. Well, let's focus maybe more on the flow efficiency board. What would be the key difference between a flow efficiency board and some other Kanban board that you might see?
Okay, so the point here is we need to know where the Herbie is. Yes. And also in front of Herbie we need a buffer, so a minimum number of slots, so to say, that must always be present. So that gives like that safety feature that if something bad happens in front of Herbie, he can still continue working. And in order to get to that point, we need to instrument the Kanban boards differently. And the first, sorry about that, the first new kind of Kanban board is the flow efficiency board. Why is that? Because flow efficiency is one of the metrics I'm using as a stepping stone to get to the more advanced board, and it's so easy to do if you are already a Kanban practitioner. So what happens is that in a normal Kanban board, let's do just like 3 columns. You typically have the active state. I'm touching the work, and then I will say I'm done. I'm touching the work and I'm done. I'm touching the work and I'm done. The logic here is a bit reversed, because what I do in Tameflow is that I swap this and say we have a waiting phase and then we have an in-process phase. So waiting and process, waiting and process. This very simple change is absolutely fundamental, because it allows you to collect the not only the flow efficiency, which is the reason why we are doing this board, because then we want to measure the flow efficiency, which is like when are we actually touching our work, and when is the work lying in the queue, waiting to be touched. So this kind of diagram is extremely important, and we get to define like the flow efficiency, which is the total touch time over the flow time. And by the way, you will probably use the word cycle time, but I don't want to get into the debate of terminology. So this construct allows you to correctly measure the flow efficiency. But what is more important is that it allows you to measure the average in-state flow time. So for how long is an item either in your inbox or on your desk? In the normal Kanban situation, the column measures the time that the item is on my desk and in the next steps inbox. That's no good. Why? Because I am really interested in knowing the average flow time of when an item is under my responsibility, whether it is waiting in front of me or I am touching it. And why is this important? Well, it's one of the key elements. It's the first element, I have three, to identify the Herbie on the Kanban board. The Herbie on the Kanban board is the column that has the longest average flow time. So that's your Herbie. That's where you will then, going back to like this element up here, that's where you will position the card buffer to introduce drum buffer rope. So the flow efficiency board has this very important function. It's called flow efficiency. It allows you to measure flow efficiency. You will start looking at flow efficiency. You can gain a lot by doing that. But the real reason for doing this is that it will get you to the average flow time on each column, and therefore you have a numeric way to identify your Herbie. With the normal Kanban boards, you cannot do it because you're having only a half column in the measurements, and the other half belongs to the next guy. So you're mixing metrics.
Thank you. It's very helpful. In fact, one of the light bulb moments that I had with Tameflow was as recently as 2 years ago, because normally when you teach agility, we talk about utilization being a toxic word. But I had a situation where there was a drilling rig, and the drilling rig was costing, I don't know, $250,000 a day or something like that. And they had to maximize the utilization of the rig because it was so expensive. And I said, well, does that mean you need to maximize the utilization of the people on the rig as well? He said, yeah. So like it completely broke Kanban for me, you know, in terms of like the Kanban I was teaching at the time. And then I realized that I would have needed something like Tameflow, because sometimes utilization isn't such a toxic thing, particularly when you've got a constraint. We want Herbie to walk as fast as possible, right?
Well, John, this is a very interesting point, because the consequence of accepting that there is a Herbie. Let me draw another diagram. I know the whiteboard is the consultant's best friend, you know. Yeah. So if we have like this kind of diagram, and we like represent the capacity of our people, resources, machines, call them whatever you want, there will be, of course, one of these that has less capacity than all others, this one. And it like sets the threshold of how much the system is able to produce. What does that mean? It means that any excess capacity that all others have, if you utilize that, you are creating the unstable situation that we want to avoid. The drum buffer rope mechanism is designed in order to keep you at this level, not over it. So what is the consequence of this? Well, you have found an economic justification to introduce slack. All those green parts are excess capacity that you can use for other things, for improvement, for anything that does not produce more work for Herbie, but that can be beneficial. Now, just to be precise here, because it's an important element. Now, on top of Herbie's capacity, we need a bit of protective capacity. It's like the buffer we said before. So the excess capacity is always there, but make sure you have enough so that when I stop to tie my shoes, I can still catch up with Herbie if he's in front of me and not get lost in the woods myself. So utilization must be 100%, but only exclusively for Herbie. Any other resource that goes above the capacity of Herbie is wasting the company's money and resources. And some people ask me, what should we be doing? What should we be doing if we have excess capacity? I don't know. Enjoy life. Go fishing. Because if you if you use that capacity to overburden Herbie, you are damaging the whole system and you're damaging yourself. Or use it maybe more proficiently to learn something useful.
Thank you very much. I've got Rudiger Wolf. He's ready to come on camera now, and he's got a question for you. So welcome, Rudiger. Thank you for coming back to this live stream.
Hi, Rudiger.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me all right?
I hear you.
Okay, great. So I suppose it's a question around the ideas that you've got in Tameflow being adopted by the broader community. There was that interesting case a couple of years ago where people were asking, where's the customer in the safe diagram? Now the customer is in the safe diagram. Now, what happens when safe puts the Tameflow equivalent box in the diagram? How would, in one sense, when the ideas that you are basically expressing in Tameflow become commonplace, what would that world look like?
So you want the box for the customer? Is that what you're asking for?
No, well, I'm just, have you thought about how the ideas that you have become industrialized and more commonplace? Do you think they will? I mean, obviously ToC has been through the same kind of question themselves, already for 20 years. Why isn't everyone using theory of constraints? And if anything, the theory of constraints community is shrinking at the moment. Yeah.
Okay, so a couple of things. Well, first, customer focus is clearly important, but I would say that Tameflow here also picks up Goldratt's notion that people are important, whether they are customers, employees, stakeholders, supplier, or the broader society. I know that in the Agile world there is a lot talking about customer focus, and the customer is seen as a god. I think that's going overboard. Customers are extremely important. Unless they are happy, they will not pay you, and therefore you will not reach your goal. And unless they are happy in the future, you will not be there in a stable situation in the future, so you won't be making money in the future. But if the focus is only on the customer, you get to the extreme cases that we have seen in recent years, where even major corporations have exploited kids and other vulnerable, weak people in factories, and who know what else in third-party countries. But of course, the customer is the king, so who cares about that? So I'm clearly against that mindset of distorting the value assessment completely in favor of the customer. There must be a balance between the customer, the needs of the employees, the needs of the stakeholders, of the shareholders, suppliers, and larger social justice in the world. The other part, which was also a very interesting element, now how can I possibly make this a broader adoption than ToC, because ToC has been around a while, and the common refrain is, well, if it's so good, why do not more companies use that? Well, let's say that is part of what I'm working on now to make Tameflow gain more traction. And I think one element is to be more accessible and present in all possible venues and media channels. And therefore, I'm very happy that John has invited me to this Agility Chef show, live show. ToC, yes, it's an incredible body of knowledge. It's much wider than people normally think. They think, oh yes, it's a bottleneck and that's that. But the things that ToC unleashes with thinking processes and strategy and tactics trees and all these other tools are just precious and should not be forgotten. But I think ToC has had a major problem in basically marketing itself. I mean, it's to the contrary of Scrum. Scrum is like training wheels to start doing things in a better way, but it does not resolve the scale and complexity of problems to which ToC can be applied. But Scrum has been the best ever marketing success in the whole sector of consulting and the new industry that it created with the Scrumification of almost every software company. So yes, Rudiger, it's a challenge. Let's take it.
Look forward to it. I've got one more question, if we've got time. Just around vendors maybe that are picking up on some of the tooling support that you need, so doing things like Conweb and having various sort of Tameflow concepts to be a bit more simple to do. Are there any tools that you sort of vendors that you're maybe working with or that are working, or is it kind of extract the information out the system? And
so typically it's collecting metrics, and you can do most of that with Excel sheets and a lot of mangling, which isn't the best. However, there are some tool vendors. One is Adato, a company in the Netherlands that ever since 2014 has supported Tameflow concepts. So if you're looking for a tool that supports like the different kinds of Kanban boards, that supports buffer management, that has the fever charts and all the things that I explain in the book, Adato is the go-to partner to look into. There are other tool vendors which are starting to look into this. Some of the Kanban board providers have shown interest, but of course it's a bit of a gamble for them because they are invested in the Kanban market. But there is a growing interest. There are some companies like startups who are taking on to development of new Tameflow-based or Tameflow-inspired tools. So I think that this landscape of tool sets for the Kanban Tameflow Kanban solution will grow.
Great. Well, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Rudiger.
Okay, I've got some more comments and questions as well, Steve, if that's okay.
Sure. I mean, as long as until we drop off, yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna aim for finishing on the hour, so we're a bit over already, but we're just gonna go for it because I think we haven't hit the climax yet, I think. So I've got some more questions from John Jorgensen. I hope I pronounced your name properly, John. So what ways in which Tameflow has successfully grown and spread across an organization, which you think would be a useful reference for absolute beginners?
Okay. How do you? I like that spread across an organization because it's some of the right term. Okay, let me diagram again.
Yeah.
So, let's talk about software architecture. We have all these layers: the UI, the middleware, the backend, and nowadays we also have like mobile devices, and when you want to go agile, one of the ideas is that you develop a slice of end user functionality and you exercise all layers in that software architecture. Well, this is exactly the model I am using when introducing Tameflow, because if we now instead of software speak about the organization, which typically is like a hierarchy and it can go down many layers. My way of starting with Tameflow is to exercise one complete line from the CEO to the junior dev and start working there. And this is clearly different from Scrum, that maybe starts with one team and then tries to scale and expand. With Tameflow, we exercise one layer. Why? Because unless you have the CEO on board, Tameflow will not work. And I would say that is true for any method that you want to introduce in a company. So the question is, why would Tameflow be more successful at doing this than any other approach except ToC, possibly? Well, it is because we are using throughput accounting. Throughput accounting will allow the CEO to observe and look at any component of that slice of the organization and relate that to financial results, because the financial throughput we are measuring on the financial side will have a direct match to the operational throughput we are having at the let's say on the Kanban boards. Now, once we have done one slice, the trick then is just to rinse and repeat. Do it with the next slice and then do it with the next one. But anytime you activate a team, say this team over here, you must ensure that the action involves the whole thing up to the CEO.
Thank you, Steve. That's very helpful. Got a comment from Kay as well. She says, the evolution of Kanban as a sixth core practice. I did see that in your book, because you've got the 5 focusing steps and then there's reference to an almost 6th focusing step. This ties in very nicely to a comment by Jersey as well. Let me just bring up Jersey's comment. So that's kind of the context for Jersey's question, I think. So what, in your opinion, are the key advantages of Tameflow comparing to traditional approaches like Scrum and Kanban? I wouldn't call them traditional, but anyway. But what are the key advantages of Tameflow, and why do you think so?
Well, mainly, sorry, got a coughing attack here. Excuse me.
Okay.
Well, the key advantages are in those two fundamental patterns: the unity of purpose and the community of trust. You can get them.
I'll let you get your voice back there first while I read a couple of more comments. So we had another comment as well from Shalem. We're going to come back, Jersey, to that one just once Steve is recovered there, gets a drink there. So Shalem came in the comment because we had John Seddon on a couple of weeks ago. And Shalem says, it seems that this starts from a similar premise to the Vanguard method, with John Seddon, utilizing systems thinking, flow, and theory of constraints. Any reflections on that, Steve, on Shalem's comment before I go back to Jersey's question?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I fully support the the Vanguard method. It's not my thing, but it's very similar. John Seddon is clearly an expert on services companies, and if I were to work with a services company, I would definitely look into John Seddon's suggestions. Yeah. So it is like can we say that almost like a cousin to what I'm doing with Tameflow. Tameflow is systems thinking. It is very close to ToC. It has embraced the whole of ToC, but made it applicable to knowledge work. That's why it's called Tameflow, because it's like a new domain where ToC has up until now not been entirely applicable, at least not in the concept that we have of agile and iterative incremental based interactions that produce business value. There was that comment about the practice of Kanban. Yeah. Well, that's I love that, because that is actually my challenge to all the proponents of Kanban. I don't remember which number it is, if it's 5 or 6, but basically, in a nutshell, it is that you evolve with experimentation. So Tameflow has evolved with experimentation all the time, and I challenge any Kanban implementation to collect the proper metrics and try Tameflow, and then let the metrics decide who is delivering the most, rather than evangelizing or pontificating from preconceived biases and positions. So Kanban has at its core the elements that would allow it to evolve naturally towards Tameflow. But this will rarely happen. Why? Because then you would have to drop the column width limits, which is one of the sacred cows of Kanban, and years and years of training would have to be retreated.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Because basically, if you have column level width limits, you could hide the constraint, couldn't you? The flow, you're basically disrupting the flow. You could essentially be.
Yeah. What I'm saying is, with column width limits, it's like, going on the Autobahn in Germany. Imagine you have the latest Porsche. You want to drive at 180, but you get a pay toll booth every 2 kilometers. You can't even accelerate to half of the speed, and you have to brake and stop. So that's the effect of column width limits. They are great if you don't have anything in place. Just like sprinting is great if you don't have anything in place, but it creates a lot of instability. It creates a lot of stop and go. So at the end of the day, you are going at a fraction of the performance that you could achieve with another work limiting mechanism, which is like DBR, drum buffer rope.
Thank you. Got a couple of more comments as well, Steve, and then I want to come back to some competing mindset. So from Value Innova, a process done is inherently pull, whereas wave process is inherently push. Is it correct to think that Tameflow avoids push through drumming?
Tameflow, as ToC, does not do push, does not do pull. Tameflow does flow. It's a subtle difference, but it's an important one. And this sentence, the process done is inherently pull, whereas wait process inherently push, I think is splitting hairs with semantics. There is no substance to this argument. Sorry about that. What is interesting is measuring touch time and wait time. Touch time is when I'm working. I'm touching the piece of work, and wait time when it's there waiting for me. Now, if you start measuring these two times, you will have a wonderful tool to realize a lot of improvements. The done process done or wait process doesn't matter what you call it, but when something is waiting, it is waiting. When something is being worked on, it's being worked on. Now there is another point here that is extremely relevant, and that relates to your span of control. You individually, you control the work that you're doing, that you're touching, and you control the work that is waiting for you. You're not controlling who comes after you. Now those Kanban columns are half mine and half of the next guy. So they are not representing effectively my span of control. And that's what I want to get at, because Herbie is definitely in control of the steps he is walking at that moment, but he is also in control of the steps that are in front of him, that are waiting for him to be walked. Those that are behind, they are the next guy's problem. So why should I distort my metrics with numbers of something I do not have control over, and that is someone else's responsibility? So the flow efficiency boards are not just a cosmetic change, and it's not a matter of semantics of process done, wait process. It's really a way of structuring the work and of collecting the right metrics and having the right focus.
Thank you. We've only got 12 minutes left, so I'm going to ask you a few questions I think people will find important. So I'm curious myself, Steve, about what kind of work Tameflow has been used for. Like Scrum is predominantly in software IT. It's kind of moving out of that space now. Kanban is for knowledge work, and I guess could be used for all sorts of knowledge work like legal, marketing, whatever. Where has Tameflow been used so far, Steve?
So it's been used in many places. It's been used in startups with just a handful of people, highly skilled people who knew what they were doing but got stuck, and through Tameflow they managed to unblock their impediments. It's been used in mergers and acquisitions. There, nothing had to do with Kanban or ToC. It was pure pattern thinking and application of patterns of finding unity of purpose and community of trust in a situation where, for instance, there were more than 32 acquisitions under one company, and they just had to figure out how to work together. It's been used in large companies in the automotive sector with 8,000 employees, 120 teams, 70,000 change requests per month, and managed that. But the most characterizing application of Tameflow is something that I think all the other methods cannot claim at all, You might know that I'm also involved on the blockchain space. I live in Malta, and I designed the blockchain strategy for this country. And the process by which that was done and then received unanimous approval at the Cabinet of Ministers was an actual application of Tameflow thinking. So I challenge any of the other Scrums or Kanbans or Saves, if they can claim that they have defined the strategy for the economy of a country. Tameflow has done that.
Fantastic. Got another question from John, which kind of John Jorgensen follows on from this. So what goes well with Tameflow and what does not?
What goes well? I think I go back to what I said before. Now, if you're open-minded and believe in the scientific method, then you will love Tameflow. If you defer to authority and hierarchy, then Tameflow is not for you.
Thank you. A few things then just about other bodies of knowledge. So a little bird told me the Tameflow cuts against some of Don Reinertson's economic decision-making model. Is that so? And if so, how? Yeah.
Well, which little bird is that? I don't know.
Probably a big bird here sitting on this chair.
So Don has done like a fantastic work with his book. However, he does like misrepresent or misunderstand theory of constraints and says some things which are not quite correct. And he also strongly proposes to use economic criteria to make any sort of decision. On this, I am totally aligned. Any decision that you make in Tameflow is an economic decision. Why? Because we have that premise, the goal, make money today and in the future. The tool that Don uses is cost of delay. Cost of delay is wonderful if you don't have anything better. It's the best thing since sliced bread to make meaningful economic decisions in any sort of knowledge work setting. But why do you use cost of delay? Because you don't have a notion of the constraint. If you had a notion of the constraint, you would use something else, which is called the financial throughput rate, also known as throughput octane. If you know cost of delay, it's basically money divided by time, and the time you're considering in cost of delay is the time through the system. So to use the Kanban terminology, the cycle time. Throughput rate is the same, dimensionally the same. It's money over time, but the denominator is not the cycle time, but it's the flow time through the constraint. So again, you have to find the constraint to use the throughput rate. Now, if you do that, you will see that the economic outcome, the numbers, will be much in favor, generally speaking. There might be exceptions, but generally, it's much in favor of throughput rate rather than cost of delay. So if you're in cost of delay, or if you're using cost of delay and you want to improve, look at throughput rate, but then you must find Herbie, and then you must use Tameflow.
Thank you very much. A few other ones as well, but some other competing models have to ask these questions, right? So if people are thinking of some, might as well just say it. So can't we just use lean Kanban, or sorry, it's called the Kanban method now, I think. And then when we see a constraint, just move people around? You know, obviously you need to educate them on theory of constraints and the 5 focus steps. But couldn't you just
move around in what sense?
You know, so let's say there's a process, right? And you've identified the third column out of 7 is where the constraint is because it's got the longest cycle time. And so couldn't you just basically move people from other parts that have more capacity? I guess that is elevating the constraint. Then couldn't you just kind of when you see the long cycle time on a column, couldn't you just go there? I think I'm answering my own question because we just said earlier that if you have column level WIP limits, you won't see where the constraint is. Kind of think I'm answering myself.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Well, the first step 1 is always find the constraint. But connect this to the other diagram I drew about the capacity levels. If you have excess capacity and you have staff liquidity. I think, let's see. Okay, I'll just take it down. I still have it there. Moment.
Yeah.
It was this thing here.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you have excess capacity, so the green parts, and you have staff liquidity, so people can do one another's jobs, then yes, of course, those who I told to go fishing instead of going fishing, they could help Herbie, of course, if they have the knowledge to do that. Okay, and this brings up also another point of contention that I have, that in Agile we speak a lot about, what is it, T-shaped people? Is that the term?
That's right. Yeah.
Where you know a lot about something, but you know about everything as well, so you can move around. Now, funnily enough, the T-shaped person is a manufacturing construct. It comes from Toyota, from Lean, where the idea is that if we have like 3 machines, one after the other, and they are all doing a specific work, so the operations, pull the lever, push the button, put it there, get it out, are different from one machine to the next. The training of the Toyota worker was to learn about the operation of the machine in front of him and of the machine behind him. So if something happened, he could step in. So this is the origin of the idea of staff liquidity and T-shaped people. And in general, I would say it's not bad. It's not bad at all. But if you are in knowledge work, and this maybe opens another contentious topic, and that is, the delta in productivity, the difference in productivity between knowledge workers. And we have the legendary 10x programmer. I strongly believe in that. The Borland case is said to have been 50 times, a software engineer of Borland is said to be 50 times more productive than a Microsoft engineer at that time. And Jeff Sutherland, none other than Jeff Sutherland, stated this. So if you are in this situation where you have highly specialized resources, and of course they are very good candidates to being Herbie for the very fact that they are specialized. A specialist is the guy who has the queue at the door because everyone wants to have his knowledge, everyone wants to pick his brain. So if you have specialized resources, rather than focusing on spreading energy on creating T-shaped people that can do everything badly, I would say focus on creating more specialists and then manage the constraint. You will always have a constraint no matter what you do, so you might just as well work in order to have a highly skilled, extremely performing constraint and manage that as we have been talking. In fact, one of the points of the 5 focusing steps, step 6, which is not part of the formal numeration of the steps, is also decide where you want to have the constraint. So it makes much more sense to have a well-defined constraint which doesn't move and keep it there. And also, if we come to elevation, if I just go on to this diagram, oops, sorry about that. We said before that I have to draw here, that if you elevate the constraint, you run into system instability and you have to reconfigure. Why is that? Because in this diagram, if we raise the capacity of the Herbie here and make something exceptional like that, of course the system is unstable because the new Herbie will be here. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one way to manage this is to say, okay, we know Herbie is where he is. Let's keep Herbie there, and before we do this increase of capacity for Herbie, let's make sure that the others, all others, have sufficient capacity as well. Then we do the increase for Herbie, and we are keeping system stability. And notice that this is the only exception where you will work on other resources, on improving other resources that are not Herbie. I said before, if you improve the capacity of a non-Herbie, you're wasting time, and it's evident here. Now, if we are at the original level here and we increase this one to that point, it doesn't change the performance of the system. But if we are in this situation where we first increase the capacity of all the peripheral resources and then catch up with Herbie, we preserve system stability and the overperformance increases as well.
Thank you, Steve. Just two final questions here, if that's okay. So you mentioned earlier on that basically Tameflow is based on systems thinking, right? So the large-scale Scrum community is also based on systems thinking. It's one of their key principles, and I'm a member of their community as well. What's your beef? Because in the book you kind of gave Scrum, we talked about Scrum already and Kanban already. A few other scaling frameworks as well that you mentioned, Safe, Nexus, Less. What's your particular beef with Less? So my answer is always goes back to the fundamentals: community of trust and unity of purpose. And unless Less supports throughput accounting, and I probably don't know enough about Less, but I don't think it does. Unless Less supports throughput accounting, there is no way they can achieve unity of purpose in a modern organization. So that's the gripe I would have with any systems thinking approach except ToC, because ToC has this intrinsically. Thank you.
But Less, they are good guys. I like them. I like Buzzwater. I mean, he's doing a great job.
Yeah, it's a great community. I love it there. I think there's opportunities to get them to work together, actually. I have one other question then. So I asked this one already. So I had another question for you on Kanban. Oh yeah, sorry, I have it here. So what would you observe differently with an organization using Tameflow versus one using the Kanban method? What would you observe that would be different? This is the last question for today.
Oh, I was wishing you were going to ask me about Kinefin as well, because that's...
I can ask you about that too. I'll add a bonus question, keep you happy.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what's the difference? It's let's take two perspectives. The external and the internal perspective. When you are doing the Tameflow transformation internally inside the company, you will see an enormous change in mindset and attitude. And this change is all summarized in the story of Herbie, because anyone will be ready to help the poor chap who happens to be Herbie. So it becomes a much more humane organization where you cater much more for one another's needs. Because maybe someone is Herbie, why? Because he has a problem at home. Maybe there is some relative who's sick, and you have these chain reactions of emotions that are reflected in problematic situations at work. So that's the huge change. The mindset and the attitude becomes much more humane and considerate of all people in the organization. Notice, this also goes from top to bottom, because the effect of throughput accounting and operational throughput is that top and bottom start speaking the same language, so they communicate. In normal companies, this does not happen. The numbers of the top are not the numbers of the bottom, and at the bottom they don't even speak numbers. They talk about story points and sprints and scrums and whatever. So the generation, in installation of a common language that goes in the same direction, that creates the shared mental models, creates many positive effects. Because if you are the boss of a company, you can delegate to anyone the decision making. Why? Because you are confident that the decision making is made according to a mental model consistent with your thinking. So you will go towards the goal. This is one of the greatest contribution of ToC, and which I have picked up in Tameflow. Now, the other perspective is from the outside. If you're looking at this organization from the outside, you will be amazed at how much they improve in performance. Why? Remember that first diagram when I showed the slope of the line of the team or organization, and when Herbie was helped, when you elevated, you had like a step increment in performance. So that's what you observe from the outside. You say, wow, how is it possible that they can improve so much? They are just doing what the whole industry is doing. So these are the two perspectives. Internally, the humane dimension becomes much more like sensible, and externally, it's just breakthrough performance, as I say.
You just gave me a light bulb moment there. That's fantastic. That's a slam dunk, actually.
What's
so
that?
People at the top of the organization and the bottom of the organization speaking the same language. Because the OKRs will be getting very popular at the moment. Most big companies using objectives and key results. Not saying that that's the right model or anything like that, but if you were using a model like that, using this kind of mental model from Tameflow, I would have thought would be very helpful.
Well, that's interesting, because OKRs are a relatively recent addition to all the bits and pieces that we have in this knowledge work world, but they are like predated by Goldratt's strategy and tactics trees, and I'm using that a lot in practice, because I've developed that even further with my pattern language and pattern network. Now this would open up like a whole new topic, and I'd love to do that.
Yeah, I think
maybe we need a follow up on that.
I think we do. Yeah, I'm very interested in that, by the way.
Yeah, but yeah. Okay, we still have to do the last question on Cynefin. Yeah, I love that one.
Yes, please. So, how does Tameflow work with Cynefin, rather? Because I really like Cynefin. I think it explains why executives can't delay with agility really well. There's all sorts of good reasons why you should be employing agility, but people often kind of delay it, thinking, no, we don't need to do it yet. So I'm really a big fan of Cynefin. But I'm kind of curious, how does Tameflow work with it?
Okay,
so the whole idea of the complex space is the empiricism, isn't it?
The answer is going to be a bit articulated, so we will go definitely over time.
Yeah.
I hope we still have the audience connected, or have they?
We still have a few people, and they'll be watching with the recording later as well. So we're good.
So first, let's define like the scope. The scope, as we have been talking so far, is a business, so a company. So we're not talking about using Cynefin to resolve like the COVID crisis or larger systems of systems. So within the company, with the goal of making money today and in the future. Okay.
Yeah.
So we have to go through some steps here. First, and you probably are aware of this because it's a diagram that I had in my first book, and it's been picked up many times. We said that we have our Herbie, right? And
I'm drawing at the moment. You are right.
yeah. So let me
go
back. I have to just pick the right pen here. So we are having our Herbie, and he's following someone else, and there are others behind. I just draw three of the people in the troops, and we know that they have to walk all these steps, right? And what you typically do is that is work to be done So what we can do is that we literally take these, rotate them, put them underneath here. I'll try to do it reasonably quickly. Oops, that's... Oh, Miro is fun. Sometimes it follows your thoughts, sometimes it does its own thing. Hold on. There we go. And the last one. So what have we drawn here? Well, of course, it's a Kanban board. You see how the steps have become like the cards, the work items that we handle with a Kanban board, right? But this perspective is only partial, and it represents what happens in the work process. So let's put a WP here, and we said that the process step that has the longest average flow time is the Herbie. Good. So let's keep this in mind, because in order to reply, now how does this fit into Cynefin, we must get to know the other two kinds of constraints that I typically deal with. And let's tell another story then. Let's say that we are like miners, and we have piles of gold, and we want to take this gold to the nearest city. We want to take this gold to the nearest city because there we can cash it in, and we have to go along a path. This is the road that goes to the city. Here is the city. So it's like the base camp in the story of Herbie. But in this path, we are having different places. We are maybe traversing some woods. Maybe there is a mountain to climb. Maybe there is a stream to cross. Okay, so we have like woods, mountain, stream. Good. And what are we going to use to get there? Well, we will use a vehicle. Let's say a blue Jeep. I'm going to draw it. Is that a Jeep, John? Does it look like a Jeep?
Looks like a Jeep. I had a funny feeling you were going to talk about a Jeep in the jungle. That's where we're going.
Right. Yeah, that's what I'm getting to, right?
Good, yeah.
So what is interesting here is that this path is like a Kanban board. But we are changing perspective here. We are not looking at the Boy Scouts. We are looking at the nuggets of gold, which are our work items, that need to be transported by a team represented by the Jeep. So what the Jeep will do is that it will take maybe the first piece of gold, and okay, let's change color here because otherwise. Okay, take this.
Very
one.
impressed with your drawing skills, by the way.
Oh, thank you. So we take this first nugget of gold and we go to destination, and then we go back and we take the next one and we go to the destination and we go back. So this is like the iterative part. We keep on iterating. And inside this Jeep, because it's a team of people driving the Jeep, or the components of the Jeep constitute what you need to go through this journey. That's your work process. So the Jeep is your work process. Good. We have inside the Jeep, there is some component, maybe it's the engine, that doesn't allow it to go any faster. That is the constraint in the work process. Good. So now we start looking at this journey that we have to do, and what can we sort of expect? I don't say predict, but expect. Well, there is a mountain here. We have to go up and down. So most likely, that's where we will slow down. We will slow down a lot. A lot. Why? Because we have to climb, and it's a windy road. Okay? So that is the constraint in the workflow. Oh, my voice is going again. Excuse me. Sorry about that.
Paul just gave us a comment, so just put it on the screen. That's okay. So Steve said that Tameflow won't work unless the CEO is on board, and that if you defer to authority hierarchy, then Tameflow is not for you. Why defer to the CEO then? And does this mean that Tameflow is for CEOs only?
No, absolutely not. Tameflow is for the entire organization. So, we leave no man behind. But the fact is that we have legal requirements. The CEO is legally responsible to make certain decisions and to sign certain papers. And unless those decisions are made, all the things we're teaching in Tameflow just cannot happen. Therefore, the CEO must be on board. But the CEO must realize that he is no longer in a state of authority, but he becomes like a fellow with immense responsibility in a larger context. I make the comparison of imagine you are the CEO of an airline. When you board a plane, flying a plane is mainly knowledge work. Pilots train years and years and study a lot to become pilots. When you board a plane, even if you are the CEO of the company, the captain of the aircraft has absolute powers. You just have to trust that that captain is doing the right thing, and you have to delegate the decision making of the flight to the captain and just shut up and accept that. So now that's like a colorful way of putting it, but if a CEO wants to implement Tameflow, he has to accept the premise that in knowledge work, the workers know more than the managers. And Drucker said this a long time ago. So if the workers know more, they have to make decisions. And the CEO has to delegate the decision making. But unless there is the acceptance at the C level that throughput accounting is the way we measure numbers, that just materially cannot happen. Now, without throughput accounting, the CEO will continue to speak his own language and will not understand what you're doing. So the next hyped method or consultant that comes through the door will get the next round, and the transformation fatigue will just continue with yet another method. On the other hand, if this way of looking at the organization, founded in throughput and metrics and numbers and financial results, is internalized by the CEO will be a supporter of the whole method. So having the CEO on board is a necessary condition for this to work.
Yeah, different type of leadership. And anyway, hopefully you're recovered now. We can continue with the jungle and the Jeep story.
Right. So we have to climb this hill, and this hill will then be what I call the constraint in the workflow, because the flow of work goes through this path, and that is the hardest part of the path. Now, in any particular iteration, it might be that our Jeep at a certain point, say here, okay, let me change that so we see it better. With red, I want to do it. Here has a breakdown. Maybe it's a flat tire, maybe there is something that breaks in the engine, but the Jeep has to stop. And we have to fix the thing that broke, and then we can continue. This is the constraint in the work execution, okay? So now we have the three elements: the constraint in the work process, the constraint in the workflow, and the constraint in the work execution. We have tools in Tameflow to examine all of these elements and detect when one is like more important than the rest. So let's see how this relates to Kinefin, and I will just go over to the next slide. Let's see, am I on the right one? Yes. So in Kinefin, we know that we have these quadrants. Help me out. What is it? Clear, complicated?
Clear,
Complex.
complicated, complex, chaos, and then they have in the middle aporia, which is like stepping back and reflecting, or confused. So A/C in the middle, but they're the four.
Okay, something there in the middle.
Yeah.
Okay, so when I look at knowledge work, I consider that knowledge work happens mostly all the time in these three quadrants. If it's chaos, it means it's an emergency. The building is burning or something like that. Now, with respect to what I said before, here we have the Jeep. Here we have the mountain.
Yeah.
And here we have the accident.
Yeah.
So if we are looking at the interaction of all these three elements, depending on what is keeping you back the most, it could be the Jeep, it could be the climb, it could be an accident, you can intervene according to what the Kinefin framework is suggesting. When there is an accident, okay, if it's a Jeep, it's simple enough, you probably know what to fix. But if there is some elusive bug or an action from, let's say, a competitor that changes the rules of the game, well, that's of course when you have to sense and respond, and so on and so forth. But what do you focus on when you do this? Of course, on the constraint in the work process, the constraint in the work flow, and the constraint in the work execution. So you see that by understanding where the constraint can show up, and remember the constraint, as we said at the beginning, is not necessarily a bottleneck, it is whatever element mostly prevents you from driving the Jeep to the city, so from reaching the goal. Well, you know which constraint to look at. So this is in a nutshell how you can map the thinking of Tameflow to the Kinefin framework.
Thank you very much. Fantastic presentation, and thank you for answering all of my questions, Steve. Just want to remind people as well who are watching that there is a special offer to get this book for under $50. It's normally $120. As far as I'm aware, it's not available on audiobook. Is that right, Steve? It's just on print, right?
Yes, for the time being, it's just on print.
Yes, I want to thank you very much. I also want to thank Rudiger for joining us online as well. Rudiger just says brilliant. Thank you, Rudiger. On private chat, he just sent me a message there. Thank you as well for all the people who just made comments today and contributed. We went on for quite a while, nearly an hour longer than I'd planned, but I really enjoyed it. And I'm glad we did, actually, because my two light bulb moments were in the last half an hour. So, like I admitted to John Seddon when I met him, I'm a slow learner. It took me 2.5 hours to understand. So really good light bulb moments there in terms of this common language between the executives and the people on the ground. I think we could have a whole other live stream on that subject alone on OKRs or something similar in the Tameflow direction, and also in terms of how you're explaining how you deal with complexity as well. So in terms of the different types of constraint in the work process, the workflow, and the work execution. So thank you very much for that, Steve.
Well, it's been a pleasure, John, and I've actually been inspired by you doing these webinars, and I have this half idea of trying to do them on my own, of course, focusing on Tameflow. So if the audience is still awake here, and I'd love to hear their comments if they would like to have more of this kind of stuff on a more regular basis. Any comments on that, I would immensely appreciate.
Yeah, so some comments coming in here. Time very well invested. Thanks from Value Innova. Dabber Basic said, thanks very much. Mike Levins said, thanks guys. Jersey saying, thanks for the session. Thanks. Raining Knowledge, I agree, Max. Raining Knowledge. Brilliant presentation. And does anyone have any comments as well on would you want to see Steve do his own thing? Would you be a fan? Would you give that a like, thumbs up? Can you give some comments? If you don't do it now, you can do it afterwards as well in the comments afterwards. They're getting some comments already. So Valanova said definitely yes, more Tameflow please. Antonio, that would be brilliant. And this I'm sure there'll be more comments coming in as well. But it seems to be a good reaction, and people are very good to stay with us the whole way. We over 50 people at the start, and we've got it down to just under 15 people now online. But what I usually find is more than 5 times the people watch after that. I've seen a lot of people watch the recording. Mike Levin says, be brave, try it and see. Absolutely. Do what you like.
Right.
Antonio, I'd love to hear Steve. So seems like you're getting good warm vibes. So thanks for that. And also from Rudiger as well, he's saying we definitely join in, Steve. So you're getting some good vibes. I think you should.
Okay, very good, very positive. Thank you.
Okay. All right, we're going to close it out there. Thank you so much, Steve, for joining, and thank you everybody for coming. And thank you for coming on camera.
One more thing, if you allow me.
Yes.
John, I've been on Tom Cackley's Spamcast a number of times, and this coming Saturday he's going to start one of his reread Saturdays, and they will be rereading like my Tame Your Workflow. So if the audience here wants to have like a group of people and read the book together, that's going to happen now, this coming Saturday, if I got that correctly.
Fantastic, brilliant. People will love that, I'm sure. Thank you so much. Brilliant, Steve. We're going to leave it there. I'm going to say goodbye to everyone for today. Thank you so much for your engagement.
Thank you.
See you again soon. Take care.
Yeah, maybe I'll be online on another channel soon.
Yeah, I might be the little bird.
Okay.
A couple more comments just to close out. Steve, are you available via Twitter? The question if they come up, or resume up.
Yeah, sure.
Updates.
I mean, my handle is @Tendon.
@Tendon, nice and simple. Yeah.
@Tendon.
And Jersey said more Steve, please as well. So
Okay.
Lots of love coming in. Okay, we'll leave it there. And have a lovely weekend, everybody. And thank you very much for your engagement.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.